In June 1919, British aviators John Alcock and Arthur Brown became the first pilots to successfully cross the North Atlantic, more specifically from Newfoundland to Ireland, so a fairly short distance, but given the primitive condition of the airplanes at the time and their limited ranges and the virtual lack of radio and other telecommunications communication, and then the fact that they were on their own unless the good Lord decided to help them should they crash into the ocean, or unless they happened to crash near ships of significant size where they could quickly be then hauled on board and treated of their injury should they have survived. They flew a modified First World War Vickers Vimy bomber from St. John's, Newfoundland to Clifton, Connemara, County Galway, Ireland. The British Secretary of State for Air, Winston Churchill, presented them with the Daily Mail Prize for the first crossing of the Atlantic Ocean by aeroplane in less than 72 consecutive hours. A small amount of mail was carried on the flight, making the first transatlantic airmail flight. The two aviators received the honor of Knight Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, KBE, a week later by King George V at Windsor Castle. John Alcock was born in 1892 in Basfordhausen, Seymour Grove, Firswood, Manchester, England. Known to his family and friends as Jack, he first became interested in flying at the age of 17 and gained his pilot's license in November 1912. Alcock was a regular competitor in aircraft competitions at Hendon in 1913 to 1914. With the onset of the First World War, he became a pilot in the British Royal Air Force. He was captured in Turkey after the engines on his Handley Page bomber failed over the Gulf of Xeros. After the First World War, he wanted to continue his flying career and took up the challenge of attempting to be the first to fly directly across the Atlantic Ocean. Arthur Whitton Brown was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1886 to American parents. Shortly thereafter, after moving with his family to Manchester. Known to his family and friends as Teddy, he began his career in engineering before the First World War broke out. Also, he was captured during that war after being shot down over Germany. After released and returning to Britain, he continued to develop his aerial navigation skills. In April 1913, the London newspaper, the Daily Mail, offered a prize of £10,000 of that time. So multiple times in today's inflated money. To the aviator who shall first cross the Atlantic in an aeroplane in flight from any point in the United States of America, Canada or Newfoundland to any point in Great Britain or Ireland in 72 continuous hours. During his imprisonment, Alcock had resolved to fly the Atlantic one day, and after the war he approached Vickers Engineering, an aviation firm at Weybridge, who had considered entering their Vickers Vimy 4 twin-engined bomber in the competition but had not yet found a pilot. Work began on converting the Vimy for the long flight, replacing the bomb racks with extra patrol tanks. Shortly afterwards, Brown, who was unemployed, approached Vickers seeking a post, and his knowledge of long-distance navigation persuaded them to take him on as Alcock's navigator. Several teams had entered the competition, and when Alcock and Brown arrived in St. John's, Newfoundland, the Handley Page team were in the final stages of testing their aircraft for the flight, but their leader, Admiral Mark Kerr, was determined not to take off until the plane was in perfect condition. The Vickers team quickly assembled their plane, and at around 1:45 p.m. local time on June the 14th, 1919, while the Handley Page team were conducting yet another test, they took off from Leicester's Field, Newfoundland. It was not an easy flight. The overloaded aircraft had difficulty taking off the rough field and only barely missed the tops of the trees. The paving of airports would not start until, I believe, the 1930s. Yeah, the paving of the runways and taxiways. At 17:20, the wind-driven electrical generator failed, depriving them of radio contact, their intercom and heating. An exhaust pipe burst shortly afterwards, causing a frightening noise which made conversation impossible without the failed intercom. At 5 p.m. they had to fly through thick fog. This was serious because it prevented Brown from being able to navigate using his sextant. Blind flying in fog or clouds should only be undertaken with gyroscopic instruments, which they did not have. And Alcock twice lost control of the aircraft and nearly hit the Atlantic Ocean after a spiral dive. He also had to deal with a broken trim control that made the airplane very nose heavy as fuel was consumed. At 12:15 a.m., Brown got a glimpse of the stars and could use his sextant and found they were on course. Their electric heating suits had failed, making them very cold in the open cockpit. However, this of course made sure that they also stayed awake. At 3 a.m., they flew into a large snowstorm. They were drenched by rain, their instruments iced up, and the airplane was in danger of icing and becoming unflyable. The carburetors also iced up. It has been said that Brown had to climb out onto the wings to clear the engines, although he made no mention of that. They then crash-landed in County Galway at 8:40 a.m. on June the 15th, 1919 local time, not far from their intended landing place after a flying time of under 16 hours. The aircraft was damaged upon arrival because of an attempt to land on what appeared from the air to be a suitable green field, but which turned out to be Derry Gilmlaw Bog, or swamp, near Clifden in County Galway in Ireland. Fortunately, neither pilot was hurt, and neither one drowned. Brown said that if the weather had been good, they could have pressed on to London. Their altitude varied between the sea level and 12,000 feet or 3,700 meters. They took off with 865 imperial gallons or 3,900 liters of fuel. They had spent around 14 and a half hours over the North Atlantic, crossing the coast at 4:28 p.m., having flown 1,890 miles or 3,040 kilometers in 15 hours 57 minutes at an average speed of 185 kilometers per hour. Tom Cork Kenny of the Connacht Tribune was the first journalist to interview them. They were treated as heroes on the completion of their flight, especially given the life-threatening difficulties. A few days later, King George V of Britain gave them knighthood. Alcock and Brown flew to Manchester on July the 17th, 1919, where they were given civic reception by the Lord Mayor and Corporation and awards to mark their achievement. Tragically, Alcock was killed just 5 months later, on December the 18th, 1919, when he crashed near Rouen, France, whilst flying the new Vickers Viking amphibian to the Paris Air Show. Brown died in October 1948. Two memorials commemorating the flight are sited near the landing spot in County Galway, Ireland. The first is an isolated cairn 4 kilometers south of Clifton on the site of Marconi's first transatlantic wireless station, from which the aviators transmitted their success to London, and around 500 meters from the spot where they landed. In addition, there is a sculpture of an aircraft's tail fin on Erislannan Hill, 2 kilometers north of their landing spot, dedicated on the 40th anniversary of their landing, June the 15th, 1959. 3 monuments mark the flight starting point in Newfoundland. One was erected by the Canadian federal government in 1952 at the junction of Le Marchand Road and Patrick Street in St. John's. The second monument is located on Le Marchand Road, while the third was unveiled by the first Premier or Provincial Prime Minister of Newfoundland and Labrador, Joseph Smallwood, on Blackmarsh Road. A memorial statue was erected at London Heathrow Airport in 1954 to celebrate their flight. There is also a monument at Manchester Airport, which is located under 13 kilometers from John Alcock's birthplace. The rebuilt aircraft is located in the Science Museum in South Kensington, London.